Good morning, everyone. My name is Viviane Romeiro. Welcome to this event today, talking about opportunities and challenges regarding a regulated market for carbon in Brazil. We want to discuss the state of the art for this agenda in Brazil, its challenges, opportunities. It's a topic that has been discussed a lot, especially now with the New York Climate Week 2022. This event is coordinated by the Brazilian Business Council for Sustainable Development and also the Brazil Climate Forest and Agriculture. I'd like to thank all the partners helping us, the panelists today, Reinaldo Ceroa, professor at the University of Economic Sciences for the Rio de Janeiro University, also Juliana Lopes, head of Future Carbon Group, José Carlos da Fonseca, Co-Facilitator of the Brazil Climate Forest and Agricultural Coalition, Karen Tanaka, Sustainability Manager at Ambev. She worked with us also leading City Clima a while ago, so I'd like to thank everyone for their participation. I am Viviane Romeiro. I'm currently responsible for energy, sustainable department, and also I'm support for the climate institution regarding policy regarding climate in Brazil. The Brazilian Business Council for Sustainable Development, for those who don't know, it's a nonprofit organization representing in Brazil the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, working along with the government, civil societies, and also with the private sector working on carbon pricing, working together with advocacy processes, regulamentations, understanding the advancements in regulation when we talk about the carbon market in Brazil, with a consensus in the productive sector so that we can position that sector more properly when we talk about climate issues. As I mentioned, this event has the support of the Brazilian Coalition on Climate, Forest, and Agriculture that counts with more than 30 companies in multiple sectors working towards a low carbon scenario that is competitive and also inclusive. In practical terms, this event will have simultaneous interpretation. The link for the English version is also available on YouTube. Questions will be in the chat section, and also the event will be recorded and will be available on YouTube. Regarding the objectives and agenda, the idea is, as I mentioned, discuss some of the opportunities and challenges along the topic, and also as a preparation for COP27 that will happen in November in Egypt, understanding economy and what is the role for the carbon pricing instruments and the relevance for the market. So today, the idea is having a wider discussion regarding those challenges. We will have some panelists that will have some specific questions. We will have a roundtable of Q&A. Obviously, the idea initially about the talks is more general about the regulation in Brazil with Ronaldo. Then we're going to listen a little about the voluntary and regulated market with Juliana. Opportunities, especially in terms of agriculture and forest with José Carlos da Fonseca. And then also with Karen, we will talk about adequations for the private sector. We're going to start with Ronaldo, as I mentioned before. He's been supporting and working with this agenda for a while, also a partner of ours. And the idea is to understanding a little bit more about the challenges we have in regulated market, which is a way for climate funding that is very interesting to leverage those objectives. But we know that we have multiple challenges, and it is a complementing fundamental portion of this process for those measures that can be taken So we'd like to listen a little, Ronaldo, about the challenges regarding the regulation of the market in Brazil, especially considering the NDC when we discuss climatic neutrality until 2050. Please. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank the coalition and the Business Council for the invitation. When we talk about regulated market, we have all this hysteria regarding the carbon market, and it's been in the media and the press. It's been mostly about carbon credits. Almost every day we have some news about it. And there are many blocks when we talk about carbon market. The first one, perhaps the oldest, the voluntary market. Well, first, let me give an introduction. The market is instrument. So it's an instrument for you to reach a particular goal. So each block of this market was created with the intention of reaching a particular goal in terms of mitigation. And we have other instruments, as we're going to see, but it helps you to be in the trajectory for the mitigation you're pursuing. For example, the voluntary market, it's called voluntary because the goals are voluntary. So when we talk about climate changes today, we already know that it's without carbon. There's no discussion or much thinking about it, like, oh, should we go this way or that? Well, that's not a question anymore. If you want to compete in international market, you must have ESG, and within you have this topic among others. So there's this perspective by the companies undertaking these voluntary goals, and also a demand, because when we talk about scope 3, in terms of the responsibilities by the company, they must promote the reduction of the chain. And the voluntary market has this potential. You're generating projects in certain activities. These projects cause reduction that is connected to this demand in the voluntary market. And the companies that buy it, they might use scope 1 or scope 2 a little bit more, but also scope 3. So this market, considering this great increase of intention in net zero and ESG, increased a lot in a few years. But the prices didn't go up that much because today we have a council for the voluntary market organized by the stakeholders that will try to defragmentate this market. And we'll discuss that a little more later. A market that has been around a lot in the last 2 years, as we saw in the Paris Agreement, we have multiple factors and regulations that once regulated, 6.2 will probably be regulated soon. We'll have a commerce exchange for carbon that is different. So the mitigation results can be worked differently, but 6.4, which might take a little bit longer because methodologies will be defined, especially in forestry, carbon, but it will use the same logics as the voluntary market, which used also the credit ideas as well. But they have their own rules. So when we talk about the Article 6, supervising board will define, and the secretariat will also analyze that, their own rules. So I want to credit this particular way, this methodology. But actually, that's not true because it is the demand that defines that. And that's the uncertainty for the voluntary market. In the article number 6, when this is already defined, transparent, everything that must be done, this market will boom much more than probably the voluntary market in the next five years. We also have another market that is a little bit different from Article 6, as we're going to have also for sea transportation and others. the conventions for these kinds of transportation must regulate the emissions. So what was defined was something different. It's not about being voluntary. There is a target that is determined. They might comply with that agreement, but again, the regulated market, what kind of methodology can be used? What standard? What other add-ons? For example, specific kinds of carbon emissions. So the objective is very clear, which is for the air companies to reduce their carbon footprint, as in Article 6. The objective is that the countries comply with the regulation and use this Article 6 for the compliance. Remember that the Kyoto Protocol was a flexibilization. It was a way to lower costs for prices. In Article 6, it's volunteering collaboration to decrease the emissions. So the logic is completely different from the one in the Kyoto Protocol. The idea is to be much more rigorous. The idea is not just a zero or negative math, but also that it really changes the countries that participate. But we won't touch that now. And lastly, here in Brazil, we have something that we had a few months ago, a ideal world, 2 projects, a decree and a bill talking about a specific market. All of our commercial partners already have. If they don't have a market, they have carbon taxes. We're behind. This is not good. This makes us fragile. As the forest code, I think we don't even have to discuss it. Not having one makes us fragile, and not having the pricing to avoid deforestation. So emission agriculture and energy production, transportation, if we don't have that, we have a little, but we don't have in the other sectors in the economy yet. So this doesn't signalize that our low carbon economy will continue low carbon, that our deforestation went down and then went up again. We had some issues that compromise our competitivity. So the private sector and other entities must see this regulated market as part of an industrial policy. Just for you to have an idea, we have 2 billion in voluntary market. Since last year, these regulated markets, where the jurisdiction took upon itself a market to reach a reduction goal that is part of their package, which we don't have. It's a sectorial package, considering the whole world, China, Europe, California, Quebec, states, municipalities, almost $30 million. So this epi-trade market that is regulated is completely different from the others because they use rights for emission. Just to remind you, when we talk about volunteer markets, we have projects. I imagine that the average price, considering everything, is a situation where the license for emission that is worth a ton has a validity during the transmission. So another point that is very important is that the epi-trade, this is probably coming into effect with the decree, not having individual goals as in the NDC. If we have an added goal that you can transform into a right for emission, as I mentioned before, and then you sell to the companies as a protection mechanism for competitivity, but they can only emit if they had that certain amount. And just to wrap it up, to say that in these markets, certain jurisdiction accepted that part of the annual emissions allow you not only to use these emissions you will buy, but also the other credits that you might have in Brazil. With cap and trade, no one has a goal. If you emit it, then you can do it, but it's not individual. And it's very important to signalize that, because defining individual goal, this is much more complete than an added goal. This is the great difference that we're going to discuss later, the XPL 248, as still being part of the decree. Thank you very much. Great, Ronaldo. I think the theme is very complex, and we'll be back to discuss the decree a little, the project for the bill. And also, when you talk about the voluntary market and the regulated market, there are many important nuances, especially in terms of climate integration, all that. So, from that scenario, a little wider scenario, I'd like to give the floor to Joana Lopes, that leads the Future Solutions for Future Carbon and also supports as a partner to talk a little bit about this connection between the voluntary market, regulated market as being complementary in order to ensure the climate integrity of credits. And what are your perspectives for those challenges? Juliana, please. Obrigado, Viviane. I appreciate, on behalf of the Future Carbon and also the invitation by Coalition, being part of this panel among some known faces. It's an honor being here and listening to Professor Ciro. It's always a masterclass, so I have the responsibility to continue this debate that is so interesting, and also it is a benefit for me with this excellent explanation regarding how they are complementary and how they're specific when we talk about the instruments. So adding to what Professor Ciro mentioned, the economic aspects, they're regulated to price. So both markets are complementary. What voluntary initiatives do really well is to prepare the way. It's a pivotal role to transform the corporate behavior. Throughout these years, the voluntary market has had an essential role in the education of the private actors. Through this price signaling, these incentives incorporate as they make their decisions and have their financial strategic planning, the cost of carbon. So throughout these years, this was possible to be matured so that the understanding they had was better by the private sector, business sector about that. And just to remind you, when we started, and it was a very collective effort engaged into the companies way back in 2014, working with CDP. At the time, I was executive director, CEBDS, Impacto Global. And also when we talk about the business sector for the climate, when we talked about the carbon issues, many Brazilian companies were resistant to carbon pricing because they understood it as a taxation exclusively. So the understanding of the theme was very low. And also it wasn't very evident how much this agenda is an opportunity to Brazil. So through this engagement process, we're able to advance and mature as the business sector in Brazil, to the point that I believe it's the case that they're the only ones asking for regulation. So I believe that this is very important as a preparatory environment, which was essential for this transformation in behavior.
Of course, that the government will best address any market failures. The government is in a better position to set out rules and establish the rules in a way such the market can operate differently. While that does not happen, and as Professor Serowa has pinpointed, we are delayed, so the market emulates what the government should do. So there's a pretty important and standards to address the challenges so that the projects that are originating credits will effectively not happen on a business as usual scenario. So this is pretty important. Every single active actor in this voluntary market should commit. So this happens, and with that, we have all the basis for a regulated market, because we do need a signal of pricing on a global environment. And as we're reminded in the beginning, the voluntary market plays a role as a lever through carbon financing. So it is important to remember that for decarbonization, we need to mobilize between $100 to $150 trillion in the next 3 decades. So carbon financing brought by volunteer market has an important role because companies better understand the market logics. They feel more comfortable at first to operate in markets. They are not going to act so easily on a broader climate financing scenario as we have out there. So this trigger is very important. So we have the necessary turnaround for a decarbonized economy. And I understand that voluntary markets and regulated markets are absolutely complementary strengths, complementary forces. So if you don't have a regulated price carbon market in Brazil, it is important for players to coordinate and articulate themselves to promote principles, standards in terms of integrity of the markets. And this environment is quite appropriate to educate players and anticipate ourselves to this regulation scenario so that we have maturity, the necessary maturity to operate on a regulated market and incorporate the risks and opportunities in terms of climate to the decision-making process. Great, Juliana. Pretty clear there. And this education point is key because we have been working with these sectors, and capacity building is very important. There are several discussions. It is a pretty complex topic, and the complementary of regulated and voluntary market, especially for some sectors, the methodological complexity. And speaking of which, I'd like to bring a more sectorial view with the arrangements and methodological complexity for the agricultural and farm sector. We bring José Carlos da Fonseca. He's the co-facilitator of the Brazilian Coalition on Forest, Climate, and Agriculture to talk about these applications for the sector, for the forest and farming sector, how these sectors are positioning themselves, how they move, both in terms of environment for the market, which is pretty advanced by now, but for future spaces, the regulatory milestone of the market. So please go ahead. Thank you, Viviane. I would also like to thank and greet my dear panelists. I want to thank CEBDS, and I want to praise you for the initiative. It's a very important one in partnership with the coalition. We have several days of pretty deep and qualified debates in New York, New York Climate Week, in Brazil, and events that have a pretty significant participation, of course. I'm going to use my double hat as coalition and a bar to bring up something that I went through yesterday. I left Sao Paulo early with Roberto Rodriguez. We were fellows in adventure. We flew to Porto Alegre. We drove to Porto Alegre, 1.5 hours or so, to São Francisco de Paula, which is in a region, a very traditional region in terms of forest, especially for furniture and other uses. We joined an event, it was the second day of the event, in the state of Rio Grande do Sul. It also gathered associations of other southern states. Well, there was an accident that blocked the street. We nearly missed the event, but at night we realized we saw part of the real world, which is the Brazilian industry of trees, a bar, would represent 50 companies and associations, forest associations that share the forest-based activity. So there's cultivated forests with economic purposes and industrial purposes for several purposes, planting over 10 million hectares Brazil-wide of cultivated lands, and we preserve over 6 million hectares in native vegetations across biomes. So in Rio Grande do Sul, I talked, but during the questions, the major interest of nearly 300 forest entrepreneurs in the productive chain of that region was to know, well, these things they listen for more and more, many years now about the carbon market, payment for environmental services. How can that reach them? How is that going to become a reality for them? They understand more and more the line of implementation. And as said before, the issue of climate discussions are a mandatory element of competitiveness, because competitiveness is more economic today. So we had 300 or so rural entrepreneurs that wanted to know how to translate the discussion that we are bringing up today. It's a worldwide discussion in concrete terms. How can they apply that concretely? So big companies in the tree sector, some of them are pioneer in their finance. It's been nearly 10 years now that we've been doing that when it comes to emissions and the capacity of raising funds regarding to ESG goals. We are aware of that. And of course, more and more focusing on the carbon credit business and its potential. But how can we approach? Well, we have walked along miles. I'm a diplomat, so since late 80s, early 90s, I've been following up on this. These issues were even further from reality. We have advanced a great deal there in our day by day. Now the climate crisis is in our face and our day to day. So what was remote and far, it was nearly, it was a muddy land only for scientists and diplomats. Now it is closer to people. What it's going to generate in terms of wealth and prosperity for people, for the operators on the ground, that's a challenge that we have to advance on. So here in Brazil, as said before by Professor Seroa, we are delayed. Brazil has been missing out on opportunities. And after going deep down the well on during Rio 92, then we became protagonists of the design of the whole normative building multilaterally. That is after the climate coalition, the biodiversity, and then we get to the Kyoto Protocol. Brazil has been a protagonist, and the Brazilian private sector in several moments was in the avant-garde of that protagonism. And it had concrete project experiences in my sector of forest space in the context of Kyoto Protocol, etc. We're now pretty engaged and expecting what is going to become real in terms of regulation in COP27 in Egypt. At the same time, we have to coexist. We work, and we have the same perspective as Juliana presented of the complementarity across voluntary systems and regulated systems. We cannot just pick one or the other. What we have seen on the last few years that on the vacuum left by the lack of a concrete leadership from the government, which plays an inevitable role. Economic agents in the sectors, entities like CEBDS and the coalition have been filling the gap with advancements and developments that generate results. But the broadest results, the one that's gonna go to the very producer more massively, more efficiently, those results need to be complemented. In this sense, Brazil has missed out on the opportunity on the Ministry of Economics discussions with the World Bank, and the Congress bill did not advance, and there was a chance to advance before Glasgow, but it was left behind. And then in May, there was a decree, and that's what we have today. Some sectors, my own sector, is working to find a design that appears to be a sectorial agreement. There are different segments represented by bars, and the paper and cellulose pulp is able to project future curves. But that's the design that we have to define in Brazil. We are delayed, but we need to rush. That's the stage we are at right now. That's why this debate is so important. Thank you. Well, thank you. This is a pretty important point, because that's the base for any market to measure and verify greenhouse gas emissions. Some sectors are more advanced than others, and it is a very important technical point of inclusive training. How can we get to the very edge, as you well said? Now, talking about the sectorial perspective, I'm going to switch to a broader view of the company view with Karen Tanaka. She's sustainability manager with Ambev. Karen has worked at CEBDS. In my position, I'm pretty glad with her participation today to talk about the challenges, considering that in Brazil, most of companies have internalized carbon in their operations and investments. So how is this sector looking at the future market in terms of benefits, opportunities, and challenges as well? Thank you, Viviane. It is a pleasure to be here. I consider this to be my second home. I've worked with these very nice folks for a while. It's nice to be here in this event with the coalition and all of my fellows that I've known for many, many years, Juliana, Cero, and José Carlos. I'm pretty happy to be here with all of you today. Thanks for having me. On behalf of Ambev, we are thankful for the opportunity. When we talk industrial sector in Brazil, well, I think there are several development levels, but we are on a decarbonization path. You can't deny that. Companies have good practices. We're learning by the day more and more. We're following on trends and challenges the world has been facing. Ambev does work. It's been over 2 decades now with efficiency increase. We seek decarbonization since early 2000s with efficiency programs, internal programs, both from Ambev and Abinbev. We're talking heat recovery, cold recovery, creating a zero waste practice. We have now 90% of the waste in our plants that are reused. This is one of the best rates in the world. We exchange fuel from non-renewable to renewable sources. Brazil is a source of renewable fuel for our own gains and to generate future compensation. We do this today with companies' internal decisions strategically, and of course, a regulation would speed up, of course, not only for our sector, but for others. But considering the cap and trade system, as Professor Soroa brought up, we're talking an emission system, we're talking a mutual cooperative system, which could speed up investment targeting for the industry as a whole in all sectors. I joined some events where people said, well, we don't have any responses, we don't have technologies. Yes, we do. We have an acceleration program with the St. Miles Accelerator led by Lisa, my colleague. We have so many startups with incredible solutions. They are Brazilians. So let alone what you see around the world. We have technologies, we need investments, we need more companies, we need testings. With this innovation and risk appetite, it has scale gains, it boosts technological innovation, as I said, and something very, very important. We are talking companies, we need people. So when we talk increased search for human resources, we talk green jobs, a whole generation of green jobs that we can bring with millions of jobs in the post-pandemic era, still surfing the end of the pandemic wave, but with a global economic recession. We can generate more in new jobs. But there are studies with WFI, with the World Economic Forum, and we're talking purpose, because young talents today seek to go beyond compensation and benefits. In our company, this is pretty clear. We see more young people interested in sustainability. So we have pretty strong fronts outside of the sustainability area that work on the sustainability. It's not only a department, this is spreading throughout the company as a whole. Thankfully, because otherwise we wouldn't have time for that. And considering top-notch innovation, carbon capture, we have CCU here today for capturing use of carbon. We do this in our plants. So an example of how we recover CO2 and how we clean CO2, reinsert it in sodas, beer. So that's what we used to buy. We don't buy it anymore. Depending on the time, we even sell them. So we're talking about reaching CCS. Viviane talking about PhD. This is way closer than we think. So we're talking in MRV, as Viviane said, with structured constitutionality, which is going to bring assurance for us to invest on a long-term basis. That would be good within the Paris Agreement. Article 6 was mentioned. This brings a lot more for the market. This is joint implementations, cooperative investments as a whole that we need. We don't want, we need them. So we can access funds from other markets and intelligences and innovations that we don't have in Brazil, and vice versa, exporting ours. So a pretty well concerted market with industry, agricultural actors. This is going to bring more reach, more coverage. This is going to bring effectiveness for the market. So we have a lot to cooperate jointly. And I'm talking about the risks, just to wrap up. We're talking the gains. There's a risk of not doing anything, and it's a pretty high risk. We talk loss of competitiveness, loss of pioneerism, which is pretty important, but our learning curve needs to start as early as possible. We're also talking reputation-related risks, and also the human capital, as I mentioned. We're not going to retain or attract talents. I myself wouldn't be in the company if it weren't actually involved and targeting decarbonization. So we see that companies are engaged. Let's move on, because I think that's going to bring a lot of gains for all of us.
Great, Karen, for the vivid speaking, and I totally agree with the topics regarding this new generation of workers, that they come much more excited to bring changes, purpose above all, and how these elements, instruments, they can be accelerated. And by the way, the Article 6 that we mentioned before regarding bilateral cooperation, and we have 6.8, which is exactly about non-market options as a wider cooperation. We can also advance this agenda. And then bring in something regarding security that you mentioned. I will get into the legal security issues regarding the implications that we might have for the legal framework. And those who are interested in asking questions, you can go to the chat. We're going to have another round with our panelists. Then we're going to open to questions from the chat section and talking exactly about these implications of the legal framework. We talked a little bit about the creation of the market through the market creation and the 582 law. But how can we advance now the challenges? Perhaps the topic lost a little bit of steam due to the elections, but now we're resuming these conversations and we need to accelerate it. We need to have that legal framework. If you could talk a little bit about this process and your evaluation, how the decree might establish or not the basis for the regulated market, and being a little more assertive in this process. Thank you. Two things were very clear to me as people were talking here. Public policies is that gives the North. When that happens, that is a plus. I do what I can do. I anticipate the effort, but when you have a goal in public policies, when we talk about carbon pricing and taxes, we are given a north, and this north can be, oh, tomorrow. No, you need to give a trajectory. I'd like to remind that in Brazil, we don't even know our trajectory very well, but if we knew and the sectors knew about it, the sectors could actually adjust themselves so that they could have those investments for the next 10 years. Not just, oh, today I do it, but then rules change. And that's where we need the legal security. I need to have a north. It is important, but also it must be very clear and very safe and secure. Otherwise, I'm not going to give the proper value. I'm not talking about millions of dollars, but billions of dollars. We're talking about a change in paradigm in the production process. I think Karen, Juliana, and others mentioned very clear how people are conforming to these production pattern. And then going back to the law in 2009, which at the time it was a very current law, very important. They say that the PNC law was never regulated, but it was through decrees. It was revocated later. Then we had the volunteer goal that came out of Copenhagen. But in 2009, we didn't have what Karen mentioned, this urgency in terms of climate issues. We looked at climate issues as, well, maybe 2030, 2040. We looked at it as something for the future. Second, we had a great performance in terms of deforestation control. We had high expectations with the plan we had, and we made a mistake. It's not a mistake by this government, the previous government. We were a little too excited. As José Carlos mentioned, we're leaders in the world. Oh, deforestation control, the plans we have in place, we're the sustainability kings. We forgot to create a governance and a climate policy that are coordinated. Now we're going through a climate emergency. Why am I saying that? Because the decree, it's not unconstitutional, because the law, the bill allows the federal government to create a market and also create sectorial goals. But it's not the reality in terms of world governance. You must have a very participative forum. As José Carlos mentioned, these matters are not simple. Just distribute between sector, the individual goals. First, we have to also understand the added goals. So what happens is we need to be heterogeneous. That's why this is a little hard. When we have these discussions, it must happen in National Congress. They must give the basis for these discussions so that they're not just based on governments, because even within the government, we have changes in the department heads. So we need to understand the basis, the directions, guidelines, and having a board. This is not a subject for the departments or ministries. So this must be represented by the civil society, by the economy ministry or department, because if we don't create these governance structures for our Green Deal, we're not going to advance. This is a fact that the decree, even though it's very well meant, it still deals with security issues. It is a method that hasn't worked around the world. It's hard to see it, but if there is no method, so I tell them all, it's added. For those ones to issue, you have to buy it. And then this is just going to bring competitive, just like everybody does. So as was mentioned about the voluntary market, it allows competitiveness, protection, and many other issues. So even though it's a more unique path, I believe that it's not only goodwill, but let's separate from the decree and from the bill another governance instrument, which is the national registration. When we have the voluntary market or the Article 6.4, the CDM or NDM Council in 2023, when it's going to be mandatory, it's going to demand a lot from the voluntary market. We must have a national registry system, just like the Integrity Council is creating, where I bring the Brazilian and international offers together, not only the offers, but also the methodologies. Both the bill and the decree have this background, but the second component of the law and the second component of the decree, because the decree, you know how it works. The companies will have an individual goal. If they emitted less, if they emitted more, they can buy it. So they're not forced to buy or sell. But the problem is the goal, the individual goal by the company. This part, I think it's not the best way to go, but the registry is plausible and is a convergence point from all the legislations and all. I believe that we might be now starting this discussion along with the Integrity Council for the voluntary market. We are going to be one of the pioneers in this area because we have the advantage of being a low carbon economy. And also we have an excess of mitigations, such as the competitive advantage that we not only can comply with all the requirements, but also have an offer for the international market. And that's been discussed here. I don't know if Viviane will mention about, but there is governance being proposed in Article 6, direction to sectors where you still don't have the conventional, which is the first of a kind, where there's a tech barrier or a scalability barrier, where we can bring international resources and funds for that. And then we reach another level in terms of carbon credit offer if we have transparency for the national registry and governance. Great, Professor Ciro. This issue of the registry is very important. We've been working on it in CEBDS. And regarding the decree, our stand is, although the content is still very distant from what organizations, including CEBDS and the third sector, private and business, as the perspective that they have, but it's still too far from where it should be. But the decree formalizes an interest by the federal government on the matter and officialize the relevance of the theme, although many years later, because the reduction of emissions was already foreseen from back in 2009. So it took a long time so that it could be set in motion. But indeed, the decree does not bring the legal security that would need to have this wide social engagement, which we've been promoting for the last few years with the civil society and other sectors. The idea is that the Brazilian Business Council for Sustainable Development may bring those, and we've been putting together a technical document so that Brazil understanding, and we can bring this agenda back, especially now after the elections, so that we can resume on the topic next year strongly. Now, giving the floor to Juliana Lopes and then bring a little of what she's been working on in terms of future solutions, supporting companies in their net zero strategies and carbon generation and their portfolios. Juliana, what's the perception by future solutions by this decree and for the company's portfolios? How do they perceive the implications for the voluntary market, regulator market, and what does it bring? Because one thing about the formalization, as I mentioned, is that the topic is really in fashion now. The decree really brought this discussion to multiple sectors, which is really positive. And now it's about internalizing the details that are very relevant, as has already been discussed here today. Perfect, Viviane. I believe that something positive was to reintroduce the theme and the discussion, signalizing companies for them to prepare their mitigation adaptation plans to climate changes. This reinforced the importance of the decarbonization journey, that the companies may understand and define an ambition and establish a strategy to get there. I believe that for us to be able to turn things around in terms of a decarboned economy, we need both the rod and the carrot. So here, for example, at Future, we offer financial and technological solutions to really open opportunities and finance this decarbonization through accessory revenue. We work really with the realm of value creation, the carrot. But for that to work well, we need to have a regulatory environment. The economic agents, they respond differently to those signs. Some respond better to regulation, others to incentives. So what I see is that there are companies in different stages of maturity. There are a group of companies moved much more by conviction that took the lead, became pioneers, and have tried to anticipate those risks, whether they are physical, as Karen mentioned, climate change are a reality and they already impact financially. So the price of inaction is much higher than action. So it's important to remember. So many companies have already been anticipating themselves, understanding that this is a financial risk. And once they anticipate those risks, try to mitigate them, try to reduce their operation costs as much as they can in the value chain, they can also convert them in opportunities, positioning themselves in the marketing, accessing new capitals that have tried to finance this decarbonization. So I believe that the discussion about the carbon market is very important, working as a trigger to leverage this collective action. As it was mentioned also here before, there's a huge challenge in the value chain in reducing these emissions in scope 3. This sign of the carbon market, the incentive logic might work really well to leverage these collective action. And I think that in this aspect, the business sector has an essential contribution because traditionally governments are a little slower to take action in global actions as it is in climate change. Whereas the private sector, companies already operating in a very dynamic environment and then need to adapt with more agility and also ideally positioned to work in that direction as far as collective actions. So I believe this is really a role by the business sector. And here at Future, we've been trying to see how we can promote these connections and leverage this whole discussion to a more strategic level. Because as Ciro and Karine mentioned, we are facing a climate change, and the name of the game now is scaling. And for that, we need to be more sophisticated financially and technologically. The solutions are out there, but we need to unblock, make available through some instrument this investment, and little by little direct, because this investment today is in the gray economy, and then bring it to the green economy. This science and how we offer the proper stimuli is fundamental to see how we can move these different actors in the private sector within this decarbonization journey. So we're really focused on this now and helping through roadmaps and technological and financial solutions adapt the business strategies to this future net zero. And we work really providing the rentabilization of climate solutions, whether it is through carbon finding or having one of these positive solutions in the market. So directing strategy in that sense. That's an agenda that goes way beyond the environment department, ESG. Indeed, it is a topic that must be in all sections of the corporate culture. And companies have that potential for mobilization, for a large scale behavior change. So I think this discussion, to have it as a purpose, to define a goal, I think this has great potential in terms of mobilization. When we engage our internal and external stakeholders and have them pursue that, I think this is essential to boost decarbonization. And here we are trying to establish these partnerships and work towards that goal as a collective commitment as well. Great, Juliana. Thank you. I think it's a very interesting discussion when we talk about command and control policies, how this different aspects complement each other, understanding the inaction by the government, how these instruments also are positioned in that sense. Because in the last few years, we saw this strengthening by the business sector, and also instruments of the market as a reflex also of the challenges in terms of public policies, command and control, all that. And then bringing to the deforestation theme and fighting, I will also have José Carlos by Coalizão to talk a little bit about how coalition, along with this wide number of players in academia and other companies, how coalition has moved to internalize this discussion with these diverse sectors and bring concrete measures in terms of positioning so that the public policies may advance in that sense, and also having this connection with the decree 075 from May this year, and also the law as well.
Thanks, Viviane. Our discussion is pretty interesting. We have to talk more often because I see synergy and complementarity here in everyone's contributions. So in this sense, I'd like to start off by recording something very important, how the sectors are stimulated to advance on their own decarbonization. Just for illustration purposes, in the energy sector, in the cultivated forests sector, planted forests, today we have 89% of the energy produced comes from renewable sources. Nearly 73% of the energy comes from black liquor, a mine that was a nightmare for the sector in the beginning. In 2020, nearly 75% of all the energy used by the sector came from their own generation. So you see that there are sectors that advance heavily, but a sector like ours that in the Brazilian private sector, maybe is the third or fourth biggest investment portfolio. We said like over 60 billion reais in our sector. This is ongoing with our own resources, our own funds, and it finances itself. Like it doesn't depend on the government, but there's a demand for renewable products that we take to people's lives, we export in the Brazilian markets. So the sectors are being stimulated in the decarbonization chain because the climate emergency not only has arrived for us, for our consumer that is requiring friendly products from the sustainability standpoint, our certification systems require that as consumers from new generations are simply going to ban the consumption. If something has carbon footprints, our products will replace plastic and other fossil origin products. There's a whole dynamics that is favorable, and in the regulatory layer, both from global markets and the national market, we had to take this momentum, this natural momentum, like a good idea that is pretty timely right now. We are mature enough to collect the fruits, to harvest the fruits that were planted throughout time. And on the forest-based sector, we see ourselves as a vector of removal and carbon stock that purposely is dedicating itself to its front, like for many years. In MDL, they're pretty attentive to what will come after COP27 and pretty connected to the internal discussion on our own market that shall be born. So we were talking about reforestation, restoration of degraded areas, replacement of fossil fuels, and as I mentioned in the energy sector, use of biomass, mitigation of methane in vegetal coal production, the use of coal in siderurgy. This resonates a lot. It benefits a great deal when we start having the diversification market, the monetization market for those assets. We see that as an element for change and for advancements in this area, which is we're pretty aware of that. And that mirrors decades and decades of investment in science, technology, and innovation. So we get ready again, back to the idea of the good idea that is pretty timely. It is time to harvest those resources. Great, José Carlos. I think there's a connection point with what I'm going to talk about with Karen. We've been discussing with class entities, and because of the decree, we had several meetings to understand the perspectives of the several agents. And it was pretty intriguing to see that even economic actors that are to be regulated by the decree, maybe potentially by a bill, they are interested, they want to be regulated. The agents themselves want that regulation. The agents that are going to be regulated want to anticipate it because they understand they're better off with an environment of clarity. And this is going to bring even more legal assurance. So historically, this sector engagement is growing. We see now this pretty clear positioning of commitment and strengthening this advancement of a regulatory milestone so that this governance structure is clear and robust. Now, connecting this with the economic agents, back to the discussion of the decree as Ambev, how you see the peers on behalf of the company sector, the challenges when you look from outside, but who really is working on a day-to-day. This discussion is put into practice to bring concreteness and the challenges, actually, of lessons learned of the process so we can advance. Great. Well, thanks. This is $1 million question, $1 billion question. We're talking a more and more sourced market, so our value chains expand much more than they used to. So we're talking in the technical language of Scope 3, and today we have a climate strategy at Ambev. We call it from the field to the cup. So we talk agro with our partner producers and farmers that produce our inputs, to logistics, to the whole manufacturing processes. We talk logistics, we talk packages, which is where we sell our products. There's cooling, all of that has Scope 3. So we're talking partnerships from other companies involved in this huge ecosystem we are inserted in. So when we released our net zero ambition last year as a global ambition for the whole group, and in Brazil it was no different. So we have 2030 for Scope 1 and 2 of direct operations, and 2040 for the value chain as a whole. And what is meant by that? Scope 3 for us is over 85% of our emissions, so we have to work cooperatively. There's stake, and as Juliana said, we talk about carrot, so we better go for carrot there. So we're gonna operate cooperatively. We have from field to cup, the initiative. We work with regenerative agriculture. So we have regenerative products. Our agro in South America as a whole, it has competitive advantages that other agros don't have around the world. So we're talking restoration. We're talking more than sustainability. We are talking regenerating, recovering the soil, even better than when we arrived. It's good for our business, it's good for producers. You're going to get more for the production. They learn how to do that before everybody else. And it's good for our consumers. They're going to receive a product that has less carbon, less inputs, less pesticides. So we're talking a win-win relationship, like 3 to 4 times bigger. So we have partners, investors. This is led by Mari, that takes care of conservations of entire areas. We have also electric trucks. Ambev has the largest electric trucks fleet in the country, 250 trucks. We have partner institutions, and we do that by bringing carbon within investment analysis. We add the fuel cost and the emission cost. To be honest, we don't have to go that far. Just analyzing the fuel consumption that I avoided, just to get a sense, in the first time of the year, we saved 67,000 liters of diesel. So you see that financially in emissions, atmospheric emissions. Regarding electric motorcycles, we have those in our distribution and delivery. We add a carbon shadow price to a potential regulation of emissions. Packaging, when we talk packaging, we also have a pretty innovative work in that sense, from renewables energy use, because we consume a lot of energy, of course. in the process, the production process, but there's innovation. So we make a thinner can, so we don't hinder the user security. But a lighter can is lighter. I can carry more on a truck and so on. So we developed tools like an eco score, an eco score, to measure the package sustainability. We're talking reverse logistics, so it's a huge work that we develop with our teams. We have teams dedicated for that, and also thinking inputs, as said before. How much innovation have we got? We have a partner company, GoPack, that made a beer ring. You join beer cans, and they made it with corn. So it used to be a problem. Now it is a solution. Zero plastic for our packaging. So we are doing that today. And we go from refrigerators, we're thinking partnerships with suppliers, renewable energy investments with thousands of partners to generate energy and to install those in our plants, partnerships with Lemo Energy for the points of sale. We have over 3,000 bars and restaurants that receive renewable energy already. We're talking bars that sometimes the refrigerator is a big part of their consumption. So we're helping tackle that. We had a commitment for climate action, which is a cooperative program with 200 suppliers. It is open for any supplier that wants to join Ambev. And we also have the idea of accounting, reporting, and decarbonizing. There's Vivo, Bioingredient, Agraria, the agrarian sector, the agricultural sector. So we have the scope 3 in this commitment. So it is possible. We can go hand in hand and do this. We can implement those measures by using science, 1.5 degree, which is what Glasgow made clear. We're not going to consider 2 degrees, which was made in Paris. We're going to focus on the best practices and goals using GHG protocol. We do this, we're going to do the homework, and we're going to decarbonize even before compensating. But in order to do that, we need a cooperative work. Great, Karen. This zero net journey point is very important to understand how the challenges and collaborations are going to work. We've also been working on a net zero platform. It is a program of the World Business Council. How can we collectively support companies in the challenges they've been going through? Not necessarily an individual consultancy, but analyzing the sector as a whole. And that's a very important point there. There was a question on the chat on science-based goals. Well, we have 15 more minutes as of now. We're going to go to Q&A. I understand there are many questions on global warming, greenhouse gas emissions, and the scope of the event is focusing on carbon market, considering science and the men's actions on the greenhouse gas concentration in the atmosphere, the government influence, which is more and more present. So I am going to use the poetic license here to move on and ask more technical questions regarding the specific market topic, which is what we're discussing today. And there's a great market carbon premise, which is a science-based governance. We're working gradually, social participation, legal assurance via bill, not a decree, as discussed. And again, the science point, governance by science-based governance. And we have a question, a pretty interesting question of the chat about that. I wanted to open to our panelists how to deal with the net zero goals, because some of them haven't been assessed by the Science Based Initiative. and how this topic of certification, how we can bring climate integrity, how we can assure the commitments are assuring discretionarity and so on. So I wanted to hear the speaker's impression. And there's another pretty interesting point, which is through the perspective of ESG, which is, of course, very important, the concern on principles and paradigms. If we walk the wrong path and decrease carbon emissions, so this social perspective that is pretty important. The verified carbon standard is a complete carbon compensation established that since 2022, the greenhouse gas attributes should consider social aspects as well, additionally. So we see all this discussion on purpose and society paradigm change, there's all this generation actually demanding, given the climate urgency. So this is a pretty relevant point on the quality of the process, the definition of monitoring, so that the benefits will surpass the whole issue of greenhouse gas emissions and consider other benefits beyond that, and include social indicators as well. And that example is very pertinent when it comes to this perspective change. So I wanted to hear the speaker's impressions. We talked about technical points today, some or other or more political or behavioral in business wise. And it's important to have this more generic view, how this agenda brings a behavioral change, a paradigm change, a systemic change effectively for society and for economy as a whole. There's a high risk that we talk market and reduce if we don't discuss this properly. We may ignore some elements that are very important for social development as a whole. So I'd like to hear the speaker's take on that, science-based goals and this critical part, and also considering the social aspect, please.
If you want to follow the logic of what we're doing before, Ronaldo and Juliana, but please feel at ease. We still have another 11 minutes. These issues are of the essence, the things that were mentioned. When a company talks about net zero, we have to understand the dimension of the decision that they have taken. A net zero target means a 40 to 50% reduction till 2030, and the next 10, 15, 20 years, 45%. So there's a specific percentage. Every company that becomes net zero goes for an alliance that has a protocol. The science-based is a way to trace the curve, but every agreement has different protocols. But everything is very homogeneous. What matters is that this company, once becomes part of this trajectory, they have to do what certain companies such as Ambev does, which is transparency to this compliance and this commitment. Today in Europe, it is mandatory, the disclosure, the reporting regarding NSGs, net zeros in particular, one of the first to be regulated, so that companies as Ambev and others, that they might be well recognized in the market. No company is forced to comply with a particular goal, just like they're not forced to be profitable, but they have to be transparent about their performance. This is already happening in England. It is going to happen in England and starting next year. In the United States, politicians, Republicans, and Democrats are discussing that. Also, so we don't know for sure. Also, Canada, Australia, in Brazil, also, this has started. So you see companies becoming volunteer, but at the same time, we have to protect investors, the financial institutions that fund it, given transparency to what has been established. So it's important that shareholders and other stakeholders might be able to take educated decisions on proper information. But notice that companies also like that, because the companies that do it well, they'll be benefited from it. So we have a taxonomy. It doesn't matter just being transparent if we cannot compare. There has been a proposal here in Brazil along those lines. So we're behind, but we're not completely alienated. The business sector in Brazil is really aware to these new directions. Thank you, Ronaldo. I think I'll just take the opportunity and to complement. It's good that Professor Ciro mentioned about the commitments regarding net zero, because we are talking about a profound transformation on a business model level that it's not just going to be reached with innovation. So I think this transparency, this maturity for the dialogue, for the questioning, I think it's very healthy. Having these initiatives that are being proposed, creating guidelines as they already exist as the SBTI, but also as a monitoring instrument for those goals, and everything based in the principle of transparency. So I believe this climate education for all the actors is really important to monitor these commitments, and also for the companies to be able to develop that maturity to speak and openly about their stage in this progress regarding this commitment. And something that you mentioned, Viviane, that was really important, I'd like to comment on regarding the co-benefits. We work with this premise here at Future. All of our projects search for a positive social environmental impact. And this is essential because when we talk about Brazil, the two great challenges that we have are fighting deforestation and inequality. If these our efforts regarding also consolidating the carbon market, if they don't contribute, I think we're going to fail as a nation. As José Carlos mentioned, this market will only work at its full potential if it's also accessible to small producers, communities that live in the forests. And I think it's essential that we create space for those voices to be amplified, because these climate solutions will only work thoroughly if they involve this whole diversity, also diversity of perspectives. I couldn't agree more with what was mentioned by the professor and by Juliana. And along the same lines, I'd like to say that the coalition has had this kind of effort. We are today 330 members, very substantial number from the private, public financial sector, academia. We have our work through work groups, committees, with a deeper focus in particular topics. Also, when we talk about the carbon market, throughout the 7 years we've been around in the coalition, we have produced an interest asset of publications, advocacy initiatives. We've been trying to influence in the election process, in the movements, and the candidacies on all levels, state, assemblies, And when we have the results for the elections, we're going to see how we can advance as far as bringing ideas, given our contribution to make the political debate substantial in Brazil. We have a lot to do when we talk about the debate, something we've been developing. And once again, I'd like to thank for the opportunity and say that it is worth keep our conversations. Coalition has learned that it's important to talk not among those that think alike, but bring to the table those that think differently, that have different perspectives, and then as a group, bring convergence, and common paths. Thank you, José Carlos. Karen, thank you, Viviane. I will have to agree with José Carlos in agreeing with my other colleagues. We have a way that we have developed so far. Brazil is a leadership that maybe with the pandemic and everything, maybe it's dormant, but we have knowledge that we have acquired from past experiences and how much we can, as a team, overcome and be an example to the world. When we talk about decarbonization, goals, climate changes, I agree with Viviane. We're not talking about a substantially environmental problem. No, it is social. It is about justice. It is about equity, access. So when we talk about climate justice, we're talking about all this racism regarding the climate changes by the people that least contribute to it. So it is a responsibility by governments, entities, groups, yes, to address these issues because we're talking about social justice. And I think this is so important that when I introduce myself in company, I say that I am a sustainability manager and also a climate activist because we say, well, if they have 1 minute to listen to the word, we have to bring this knowledge, disseminate this knowledge, and people will be able to create solutions themselves. So we have today hundreds of people at Ambev working on decarbonization of the operations. I'm talking about contact with consumers, reverse logistics, agriculture, because we can't just be a small team that will handle all that. So we're talking here about cross skills, each knowing their area, but also exchanging, without which that change won't happen. So I have the honor of being at a place where this is taken seriously. And I think that, and I'd like to say that we are professionals on environmental issues, sustainability. We need to put that pressure and understanding what's going to boost us forward. Collaboration, that's the idea, so that we can stand out in a positive manner for the environment, for people, because we're talking about a social crisis. It's not just a mere environmental crisis. Obrigada, Karim. And reinforcing quickly, because we're running out of time, but reinforcing what José Carlos mentioned about living the bubble. I think it's essential that we have this plural discussion, something that's been talked about recently. COP26 last year really showed that the diversity of actors that are participating and how this agenda gained different dimensions and the topic of climate changes and everything. So diversity, getting out of the bubble so that we can have more impact. Well, we're closing then at the proper time. I'd like everyone who still here to the end of the discussion, all the panelists and our partners, I'd like to reinforce that the event was recorded both in English and Portuguese for those who are interested or those who didn't have the opportunity to watch live. We'll continue with all the activities, expanding our technical knowledge and bringing this more wide discussion to society. I hope to see you once again at COP27. So once again, thank you very much, and I'll see you later. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Congratulations for the event. Thank you.